Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This mega show is about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of the Blacklist. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I always think it's interesting when the show does episodes that are non-Blacklister episodes. There's been probably maybe a dozen at this point in time, maybe a little less. It's always interesting when they pop up. But this episode was a really neat, look into Wrestler, how he, we saw the end result of how he processed it. Because I guess, out of anyone, Liz's death was going to hit him harder than anyone else amongst the team, especially because we saw how he went about handling his grief, and that led him to getting addicted. Obviously, it's the 2-year anniversary of her death. So Agnes is more about celebrating her mom's life and who she was rather than focusing on it being her death. But Wrestler's like, he doesn't know if he'll be able to make it. And so we kind of jump back and forth between present day with him, now back obviously on the job and wanting to finally slip back a little bit of being who he was beforehand, even to the point he gets his hair cut and his beard shaved. And he's like, oh, you look like you've seen a ghost. And Wrestler's like, yeah, just someone I haven't seen in a long time. And so, he lost this part of him got lost the moment Liz died. We kind of get his perspective a little bit on that night when he shows up in time, but sadly not soon enough. And Liz dies and he goes chasing after Denbei and Reddington. There was this, I don't remember if this was, and it played at the beginning, but I don't remember if that was Reddington who said sorry or Denbei, because that's also going to, like I said, they didn't touch on it, but, obviously that's going to fuel Reddington's issues with Denbei, knowing that he told Liz the truth, and that's why she hesitated in the end. But Wrestler were just so fueled by rage, they went chasing after Reddington. He was already in bad condition. He was still just right. He just left the hospital. It's not like he was released. He left, and he was driving, got in a car accident, and just made things worse. Obviously, the cops wanted to question him, which Cooper was like, no, don't even bother with that. He's up here trying to fight for his life, considering everything that's going on, all that happened that night, and you're trying to arrest him. It's like, no. Granted, when he does get better, they are trying to bring him up to see whether the DA is trying to decide whether or not they're going to bring up charges against him, because he did hit another driver, and it's like, luckily she's going to be okay, but they're going to wonder whether or not to bring up charges, or will he'll lose his badge or not. Obviously, at first, he's reluctant to get it, because his doctor wants to give him pills and stuff like that to mitigate the pain. But he doesn't want it at first because he knows he has addiction issues. But the doctor was like, you're going to need these, because I'd rather you take these now rather than the pain gets so bad later that you go on the streets and it turns into an even worse situation. He's like, I'm reluctant to give you these pills in the first place, but it's the lesser of the two evils type of thing. He's like, at least promise me you have people around you to help. And he's like, I do. But sadly, Wrestler separated from everyone else. This is when he left. Because in the aftermath of all this, obviously, Reddington's immunity deal got revoked. The task force was done. That's when everyone ultimately went their separate ways. But Wrestler was the first one to kind of finally go, because for him, it's like he couldn't be around. Because if he did, he'd just be all about hunting Reddington. And, Liz, you said Liz would want us to move forward. He's like, well, that's what I'm going to try and do. But Cooper was like, no, let us help you. Let's all be there for each other. He wishes he could, but it's just what he was going through at the time. I don't know if the others would have really been able to help him, because he wouldn't have been in a position to receive their help. And so it's like, right, I can't help you guys if I'm not even willing to necessarily help myself in this regard. So, but obviously that time passes so quickly. Finds his way moving from town to town until he finds his way in a small town, and stays at a small little hotel with a mom and her son. Obviously, he's making sure, because you could tell he got the shakes early on. You're like, oh, what? I was like, oh, you're going through withdrawal? I was like, oh, you had the pill on you. I'm like, why didn't you? Oh, you're doing the classic thing of smashing it and sniffing it, because that way it hits quicker. Okay, never mind. I was like, why not just pop that while you were waiting? It's like, all right, because it's going to take a while if you ingest it. So normally, but then goes to the bar and everything. I figured that wasn't going to end well for him when the guy was like going to hook him up with drugs. I was like, at first I was like, are they going to try and jack you? I was like, oh, this is kind of bad for them, but you're an FBI agent, but he's drugged up, he's hurt, he's kind of lost a step or two at this point in time, and they beat the crap out of him. I was like, you work here, you work at the bar, like, how are you just gonna be okay with, like, jacking someone that's eventually going to come back? But I guess it's like, right, if you come back, we'll mess you up. Or, I don't know, like, I guess maybe after that, she left, quit the job, and they moved on, you know? I was almost wondering whether or not he'd come back to that small town and get some payback. I was almost kind of like, I hope you do, but I'm glad they kind of didn't, because it's like, no, that's not what wrestlers doing, because it's like, it's a trade, like, it's my own fault, like, I wanted to get some oxy, I got my ass kicked and robbed, you know, it's just part of the trade. Hell, I don't think they brought him back to his room. I guess, like, after getting his ass kicked, he, like, managed to, like, find his way back to his room, but because they robbed him, they took his key, his wallet, and his phone, which sucks. I wonder if, sadly, they probably will never find out that they robbed an FBI agent and just like, oh, they've got egg on their face. But to be fair, he wasn't an FBI agent at the time. But yeah, he couldn't even get in his room, so he just passed out on the floor. And the kid, Theodore, found him. And Wrestler just kind of shoos him off. It's like, I don't want medical aid. I don't want anything. Just leave me alone. And it's just like, well, if your son didn't tell you, but I got robbed, so I actually need a way to get inside of my room. And he's like, fine, I'll leave here because I actually don't have any money. She's like, I can't let you stay here. Because he's like, nah, like, I keep to myself. My situation is my situation. She's like, yeah, but I don't want it to bleed over with my son. He's like, I'm sure your son has witnessed a lot of crap. I mean, hell, I got jacked in this town, so it's not like this is a great town, too. Because even she had referenced early on, yeah, oh, it's a small town, not like it's a great town or something like that when he first got there. So, but he ends up working at a garage. Initially, it's just like janitorial stuff, but he's also like, it's like, no, well, the guy's like, basically, I want you to do everything I don't want to do. But also, it's like, there's a car he's working on, which Wrestler knows about cars. Obviously, we dived a little bit in, what was that, 2 seasons ago? I think that was like season 7, I believe. I believe it was season 7 where we dived into like Wrestler's past a little bit. But, the fact is that he kind of talked about, like, right, him and his dad, the whole thing with cars. And so he's willing to, like, help, like, do all the other stuff, plus help the guy who runs the garage work on this particular car. I should have brought this up earlier, but there is an interesting parallel you can draw between this and back in, was it season 3, when Reddington thought Liz died for real, but her and Tom, along with Kate, faked Liz's death. Sad that finally came true in this particular regard, but this episode reminds me of the aftermath of that, like where Reddington went off on his own. It was one of those other episodes that wasn't a Blacklist or titled episode, and he was seeing, now we know at the time it's like, he was seeing Katarina, but it was like, no, he was seeing, you know, himself, kind of haunted by the ghost of who you used to be to some extent. Once again, probably at that time, they probably hadn't figured out who they wanted Reddington to really be. They probably over the course of the show, they probably constantly... I'm curious, like, how far back the writers knew. I'm jumping around a little bit, but even that's one of those episodes now in retrospect. It's like, did they know back then what they... Because that changes that dynamic a little bit more, but also it's like... Because that means on some level you had to know it wasn't real the entire time if that was the case. So that's one of those things where I'm like, they had to, like, make it so that I'm just curious, like, how long they've been sitting on it. Maybe even the writers are like bouncing back and forth between different ideas of who they wanted Reddington to be, and it's just like, right, they picked one. Maybe it's just a thing of like, right, they kept surprising. It's like, oh, we don't know who it's going to be. We're keeping ourselves, we're up in the air before a final decision was kind of made. So maybe even they were kind of kept in the dark in certain points. But nevertheless, I don't know. I'm going on a whole tangent about it, but like this episode reminded me of that, like Reddington and Wrestler kind of being in that same position in certain regards. So, and I like Wrestler is keeping his distance, even from like Theodore, who stops by the garage and like they hang out, even though he just wants the kid. He's like, fine, don't touch anything, leave me alone. He's not trying. I'm not trying to make friends. I'm not trying to connect with people. In fact, he severed all his connections because he's not in a position to really get close to people because he's kind of under the assumption anyone I get close to is going to end up getting hurt because the person I cared about most died and I wasn't able to do anything for them. I wasn't able to do anything for her. And it's just he's not in a position to help anyone. Well, he helped out a little bit because it turns out they're running from an abusive husband situation. She married a cop. We find out later on he's not Theodore's actual biological dad. His biological dad died of like an aneurysm or something like that, which is just, that sucks. Because that's just kind of out of nowhere type of situation. But yeah, he's a cop, and he has a lot of pull and connection because he is a cop. So an abuse situation is already bad enough. Adding an element of him being a cop. The sad thing is she kept coming back to him thinking like, no, it'll be okay. And she would have kept going back if it wasn't for him snapping on Theodore at one point in time because he wanted quiet. And Theodore is the inquisitive kid that he is, and he smacked him. And so that was the final straw where it's like she was going to take it time and time again and was willing to forgive him time and time again. But he crossed the line the moment he hurt Theodore. So they've been running ever since. And that's the thing, like, yeah, Wrestler might try to detach himself from people, but who he is at his core is still there because he did care about this family. He's like, right, he looked after Theodore. He had his own experience, obviously, around Agnes and stuff. And even to the point, because Theodore is currently reading Peter Pan and he likes it a lot. And obviously, Wrestler, it's like, right, a friend of mine read that to her daughter. It's like, well, duh, it's a really good book. But he talks about between sleep and awake, and it's like, what's that? It's like, yeah, it's from Peter Pan. He's like, it's where I get to dream about my day. It's that spot between you're like dreaming but you remember that you're dreaming. And he was like, I get to go on adventures with my dad, even if it's just inside my head. I get to go on these wild, crazy adventures with him. I get to keep him alive a little bit more. And he's like, I know people around me are telling me I should move on, and and which even Wrestler's like, yeah, even I'm struggling with that. And that is that complicated thing of like, I don't know. I don't think there's ever a right answer when it comes. I think there's some wrong answers when it comes to grief, like trying to numb yourself like that. It's a complicated thing of like, it's a process, but you don't want to have you don't want to like lean into negative tendencies or even vices to kind of deal with that. But I think kind of going at things in your own pace, even if that's your way of coping and dealing with it, is like him keeping his dad alive with adventures in his head. And he's like, oh, why don't you tell your mom about it? And Theodore's like, I can't, like, she just worried more. So, but, even Wrestler's like, yeah, you pretend that you're okay until long enough that you're okay. And it's like, is that the right advice? I don't know. Like, everyone finds their own answers to it all. Once again, hopefully it isn't, vices and, negative things you're doing to compensate for that. But still, I think it is super cute that he invites Wrestler to his party. He's like, you don't want to be around me, kid. I'm a bad person. Or not really a bad person, but just the people around me gets hurt and I don't want anything to happen to you. Because for Theodore, it's like, yeah, you're the only friend I have, because him and his mom are constantly on the run trying to stay away from her husband that he left his entire life behind. This might have been the only time they've ever moved. He talked about moving before, so this might have been the only move they've ever made. So they might not be moving around all the time, but it's just like, right, because they're also in a position to move right now. So he doesn't really have anyone he can get close to. So Wrestler's the only person he did get close to. But I do like that present day Wrestler, he got the flowers for Liz and everything like that. He was like, even apologizing to the flower. He's like, yeah, I'm sorry I'm so short with you. I'm really nervous. She's like, it's okay. And it's like, even being like, oh, the fact that she wants these particular flowers, is she this and that? And it's like, yeah, she actually is. Actually the complete opposite of me in that regard. It's like, oh, she doesn't see the proposal coming. He's like, oh no, it's not like, it's just like, no, like, me showing up is going to be the biggest surprise. So because he says that, and because of what we saw, it seems like he immediately, like, after getting out of the hospital, he left. Like, he never stopped by Liz's grave, because she probably already had her funeral in that time frame. So he left and never visited her after, like, probably holding her in his arms was the last time he held or saw Liz or was there with her. So he ended up leaving after that. So that was the last time, which is kind of sad to know that that's like your last memory. Like, I mean, not like a funeral will be better, but this is like, like that's immediately after she died. That being your last memory of Liz is a lot, to deal with. And so, present day, he's there, like, talking to her about everything he's been through, like, oh, what Aram did, about everything with Park and the drug switch, Reddington. It's like, yeah, he's a lot. He's still annoying. And it's like, yeah, like, if we're all doing this, we're working with him again because we believe that's what you want. But if it's not, give us a sign and I'll cut line already. Like, just give me the sign. But, he had talked about when he had fixed the car and him and the guy who ran the garage went they were riding. He was like, he never realized, he was like, I was fixing that in a way it was also fixing me, because it gave me something to focus on, but also it's just like, right, when I got there it was a little rough around the edges, it wasn't working, and then all of a sudden put time and effort into a little elbow grease, you were able to kind of make it work. And slowly but surely, like, that was happening to him, that he was kind of coming back a little bit to be who he was. So when it was all said and done, though, luckily he showed up in time, because he decided to go to Theodore's birthday, and sadly her husband found them, but luckily Wrestler came in, and it ended up with the cop dying, but it was a self-defense situation, which she's now finding out, wait, Agent Wrestler, he was like, former agent. It's like, yeah, but this is a decorated FBI agent. She's like, why didn't you say anything? He's like, yeah, because that's not who I was. It wasn't really kind of important at the time. Because he's like, because it's like, for him, it's like, I'm not who you think I am. She's like, yeah, but you're more than you think you are. And I love that, like, retort to that. Like, yeah, you might not be who I think you are, just because it's like, right, I have my thoughts of who you were, and turns out you're not that person. But on top of that, it's like, yeah, but you think so little of yourself. At the end of the day, you might have your issues, but you are a good person. Because it's like, right, going from like an FBI agent, a decorated FBI agent, to working as a janitor and like as a mechanic, like, what's up with that? He's like, it's a story. She's like, I'd love to hear that story sometime. But he's not really in a position, he wasn't ready to tell it at the time. And so she's like, right, me and Theodore are kind of moving on, and maybe we can kind of find that way together, but he's kind of like not in that position. And sadly he ended up leaving. I'm wondering when he left, was that because they do find him working at a garage. I just don't remember if it's that same garage they find him in at the beginning of the season. Because if it is, I'm wondering when he left the stereo, and was that like right when they got him at the beginning of the season? So I was almost halfway expecting him to kind of reunite with them at the end of the episode, but he never did. Still doesn't mean their paths won't cross. He might, keep up with them from time to time, check up on them. He did say, like, right, I'm not really connecting with people, but given enough time, maybe I'll be there. I can get myself there again. I wasn't ready at that time, and I still am not, but maybe I will be, And obviously telling Tom, like, hey, I didn't like you. I don't think there's any reason to lie about it now. But it's like, no, I'm glad that, here you are, Liz, that you're not alone. It is nice that she was buried beside Tom, And obviously for him, he stopped by Harold's, but he never went inside. He just watched from the outside, seeing how Agnes is handling things, how she's coping with things in her own way and in a much healthier way than he is. And I love that he's like, yeah, maybe you and I will find our way, in the... that space between, like, sleep and awake, the adventures we could go on, I think that was really sweet. Theodore was bummed about Wrestler leaving. He was like, oh, you were right, he was a bad guy. But his mom's like, no, he wasn't. You were right, he's a good guy. Then why did he leave? It's like, yeah, he's got a lot of, so he was in pain, he's got a lot to do. It's like, do you think we'll see him? She's like, I don't know. But I think they will. I hope that in the future we do see them, like, meet up again, because I think that'd be really nice for all of them. I think Theodore would appreciate it, but I also think it'd be nice for Wrestler. So, like I said, if that garage she's at the beginning is the same one, it's probably a good chance that that was probably like maybe a couple months ago, so it's not like it's been a while, because I don't think they specify how much time, like, I don't know if that, because if so, because it hasn't been a full 2 years, but it's been since Liz's death. Now it has, so who knows, like, how long ago, like, it could have, like, how long, because the being in a hospital might have been, like, a couple months or something like that. maybe like a month or two or something, or maybe just a few weeks. He was in a hospital after the car accident and stuff, but I don't know. Like I said, I'd have to go back to check, or if you in the comments down below do let me know if that is the same garage he was working at the beginning, because if it is, it showcases like, right, he made sure to leave that radio before he came back to the FBI. So, but yeah, I think this was a nice little kind of like, also it was a necessary episode so to kind of give you some backstory on what Wrestler did, everything that kind of helped put him back. Like, he was already kind of coming back to his path already, like, before coming back to the FBI, and that kind of steered him, well, Park giving him some of that tough love steered him even further in the right direction, and all that, like, this whole thing, the task force and everything, Reddington and everything, kind of pointed him back in the right direction completely. So, but now he's kind of back to being himself. Like, once again, he's still got the steps he needs to take, but he's a little bit more like the Wrestler we know. So, it's definitely going to be interesting to see where the next episode takes us. We are going to be, from what I've seen, just a little, 15 seconds or whatever we saw, it seems like it is going to be about picking up with that whole Dembe and Reddington thing. So that's definitely going to be interesting. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.